right. What's up, everybody? How's it going? I am at, as of this moment, 1,999 subscribers. I am one subscriber from 2,000. So if someone subscribes that's watching right now, if you're not already subscribed, you will be the 2,000th person for sure. I'm refreshing it to see if anybody does that. All right. So today the plan is it's pretty late, so I'm probably only going to do about an hour. Let's do the Lance loot too. Harmonica Luke, you get 1,000 Lance loot, and Mason, you get 500. So good job to both of you, and we'll see who's going to get third place on that. It's Sapir. Welcome, welcome. You get 250, and Jonah, the same pair of headphones. Yeah, these are the Sony's. It's like the 4. What is it? I always forget the order. WXM, all those XM4, whatever it is. Yeah, so I got new headphones. The old ones are right here. I already forgot what kind those are. And so the plan for today is to review. This came out a year ago, but I was reviewing videos, and I was like, all right, well, I want to review a podcast episode, so we'll see how that works. I haven't done that before. Last time I reviewed TikTok videos, so we're spreading out, looking at other stuff. What's up, Jonah? What's up, Igor? Welcome, everybody. Okay, so I will see how this works. Let me know. I don't know, because I'm used to doing videos. I'm assuming the audio for this will play, but I'm not 100% sure. So you can let me know if it's going to play. So there it is. I wonder if there's a way to play audio without playing the... Yeah, like you don't really need to see toy around with the setup here. No, I don't need to disappear. Okay, so let me know if this plays, because I haven't done this before and I didn't do any testing.
An act, qua fulfilling a promise,
Can y'all hear that?
Qua affecting a just distribution of goods,
let me know if you can hear that,
or
please.
qua promoting the good of others, is prima facie right, is self-evident. Not in the sense that it is evident from the beginning of our lives, or as soon as we attend to the proposition for the...
Great. Okay. Cool. So we're going to play it from there. It's not going to be a video where I'm playing a video, so that's cool. All right, so we're going to listen to this together. Let me see if I could bump up the speed on this just a little bit. I always get a little anxious when it's relatively slow. You think we could handle 1.2? I'll stick with 1.1. I don't want to rush anybody. Just adjusting my volume. Let's see how that goes.
That an act, qua fulfilling a promise, or qua affecting a just distribution of goods, or qua promoting the good of others, is prima facie right, is self-evident. Not in the sense that it is evident from the beginning of our lives, or as soon as we attend to the proposition for the first time, but in the sense that when we have reached sufficient mental maturity and have given sufficient attention to the proposition, it is evident without any need of proof or of evidence beyond itself. It is self-evident just as the mathematical axiom, or the validity of a form of inference, is evident. The moral order expressed in these propositions is just as much part of the fundamental nature of the universe as is the spatial or numerical structure expressed in the axioms of geometry or arithmetic. In both cases, we are dealing with propositions that cannot be proved, but that just as certainly need no proof.
So they are starting this podcast episode. And again, this is an episode just called Moral Realism, and it's on the Moral Minority podcast. The people who do this podcast, their names are Devin and Charles. So I've never interacted with or spoken to them, so maybe they'll see me doing a review of this. We'll see. So it starts with that quote. I mean, it's a person making a statement about what they take, a position that they take on moral realism. So we get this claim that the claims in question, the moral facts, are self-evident. And they're not self-evident in the way that you just immediately apprehend them, but that at a certain level of maturity. I mean, all of this is just so dubious to me, because it's the same thing. If you set standards like that, you can set an arbitrary bar for whether a person has reasoned properly. So if I've reasoned and thought a whole lot, and I still don't find the moral facts to be self-evident, one can say, well, you haven't reached the right level of maturity. You haven't reasoned in the right way. It's very similar to when Christians will say to someone that says, look, God's just not revealing himself, that divine hiddenness sort of thing. they might just say something like, well, you're just not praying, or you could just keep testing God. You have to not test God. Or they might say, God has revealed himself. And you're like, but I haven't noticed anything. And this is a way, it's where there's nothing you could do where it's not your fault. It's just your fault. And this person's setup sets up the same scenario where, uh, if you have access to the self-evident moral facts, great, you thought properly. If you don't, that's a you problem. It's not a problem with the view or the means by which you access them. So I don't find this plausible at all. I mean, it's a statement. There's not really an argument here, so there's not that much to work with. Disagreeing with a statement is a bit silly, but the way the whole thing is framed, I think, is already a very questionable setup. You see what I'm saying? I don't like that setup. I want to listen to that again.
That an act,
This time I'll pause through when I go through
qua fulfilling a promise, or qua effecting a just distribution of goods, or qua promoting the good of others, is prima facie right, is self-evident.
Yeah, so it's not self-evident. And there's no point at which it becomes self-evident.
Not in the sense that it is evident from the beginning of our lives, or as soon as we attend to the proposition for the first time, but in the sense that when we have reached sufficient mental maturity and have given sufficient attention to the proposition.
You see, that's the issue. Sufficient mental maturity and sufficient attention. So, I do meta ethics. I talk about and think about this stuff a lot, a lot. I have for many years. I've given a lot of attention to these things, and I've concluded that there are no self-evident moral facts, that moral realism is an incredibly implausible position. So have I failed to attend properly? Have I just not reached the right level of maturity? I mean, I could make an analogous parallel claim to the contrary. I could say, when a person reaches a sufficient level of mental maturity, when a person has attended to the nature of morality properly, they recognize that morality ultimately involves an expression of our personal convictions and values, and that the supposition that there are moral truths that somehow exist or extend beyond our own preferences and our own personal values and our own subjective perspectives on the world is a foolish and naive notion that only an immature mind would endorse. You could imagine a quote from an anti-realist like that. It wouldn't amount to anything other than a sort of triumphal heralding of one's position's truthiness. I mean, it's just, there's nothing to that. It's just a declaration. So we'll see what they end up saying as far as arguments go in the video. I mean, they're just quoting.
It is evident without any need of proof or of evidence.
But you see that? It's evident without any need of proof. So what is the epistemology going on here? So when you reach a certain level of maturity and you attend properly, you just apprehend truth. You don't need proofs. You don't need inferences. You don't need arguments. You don't need syllogisms. You don't need, you don't need to conduct a study. You don't need to present some set of independently accessible considerations that would allow a person that hasn't reached a sufficient level of apprehension and maturity to attend to the facts properly, to allow them to access these truths. No, you just have to hit the right point in your intellectual development, and then you apprehend the truth without any further need of proof or argument. I mean, this is just such a bizarre. What is the idea here that you just directly apprehend truths? Now, then they make a comparison to mathematics and other fields. I don't think we apprehend truths in this way in those fields either. So this doesn't resonate with me at all.
Beyond itself. It is self-evident just as the mathematical axiom, or the validity of a form of inference, is evident.
Yeah, so I don't think the mathematical axioms are self-evident. I think we build mathematical systems, see what we could do with them, and then we keep the ones that work and we discard the ones that don't work. So I don't think the origins and development of mathematics involve the apprehension of some sort of special a priori truths either. I think they are constructions that we devise. They are a kind of conceptual technology. They're not a thing that we discover, but a thing that we construct. You can make discoveries of a kind within a construction. People can discover new chess openings. People can discover, new moves to play mid game, late game in chess. People can discover new strategies within, all kinds of games. But they're still ultimately constructed. And I think mathematics is the same way. You start with some constructed set of axioms, and you can extrapolate from those and make a whole bunch of discoveries about the consequences of one or more axioms interacting with each other or what consequences any individual one might have on its own. But those are not discoveries about some special realm of truth independent of our constructions. You're exploring a kind of constructed conceptual space. The same way you could explore the conceptual space of any arbitrary system of rules that you dream up. You could then think, okay, well, given these rules, what strategies would be more or less conducive to winning? Math is just like that. There's nothing metaphysically deep or special about it. At least that's my perspective on the matter.
The moral order expressed in these propositions is just as much part of the fundamental nature of the universe as is the spatial or numerical structure expressed in the axioms of geometry or arithmetic.
Yeah, it's just so implausible. So, if you encountered extraterrestrials, I would expect them to have pretty similar mathematical systems. I don't see any particularly good reason to think that they would have similar moral systems, if they would have moral systems at all. So I see morality as this highly contingent cultural construction, whereas mathematics is this highly useful technology that I think that would be and probably was independently developed on Earth, and probably has been independently developed on other worlds. Now, of course, on other worlds, they will have normative systems in at least some civilizations. Some may not need them. But there's no particular reason that they're going to have the highly idiosyncratic and specific culturally contingent conception of, quote unquote, morality. They could have different normative conceptions. I think that this already happens on Earth. I don't think every culture on Earth has had a moral system, but it's going to depend a lot on what you mean by morality. People will conflate morality with having any normative system at all. And if it's any normative system at all, then you don't have a particularly good conception of morality. But that's too much of a digression to get into here.
In both cases, we are dealing with propositions that cannot be proved, but that just as certainly need no proof.
Yeah, where did they get the justice certainly need no proof from? So we get this idea that you apprehend these truths, you don't need proof for them, and we're certain they don't need proof. I don't buy it.
W.D. Ross, The Right and the Good. Welcome to Moral Minority. I'm Devin Gray.
And I'm Charles Dashings. In our everyday lives, let alone in politics, we are constantly confronted with situations that require an adjudication between what we judge to be advantageous for us and what, all things considered, would be right. In our inherited moral language, confrontations between our practical self-interests and conscientious questions like, what ought we to do? What is required of me? What would be the right thing to do? When we engage in this other regarding relational thinking, we implicitly invoke some external standard of conduct, which is to guide our action. And
Whoa.
when we engage in this other regarding relational thinking,
so we're talking about some kind of moral thinking here.
We implicitly invoke some external standard of conduct, which is
when we engage in moral thought, we implicitly invoke some external standard of conduct. Who is we? Are they making a universal claim about human psychology? So we invoke such a standard. I don't invoke such a standard. And if any particular people are invoking such a standard implicitly, so it's not explicit. So like there's all sorts of things people explicitly do. People explicitly say things about football. They explicitly say that they believe in God. They explicitly yell at each other and call each other names. So people, you're not going to go out in the street and very frequently see people explicitly say things like, I am appealing to an external stance independent normative moral standard whereby my first order moral claims purport to describe stance independent moral facts. You're not going to see people saying stuff like that explicitly. So if the claim is that they're doing this implicitly, well, now it's not the sort of thing that's so obvious that, you could just assume that it's true without need of further argument. But I do think that if you're going to say people are implicitly doing a particular thing, you're making an empirical claim about human psychology, and there's some degree of onus on you to present evidence of that. And have realists done this? No, it's mostly anecdotal evidence, which is not particularly good evidence, and armchair theorizing, usually by analyzing toy sentences in the English language. What I mean by that is that they'll come up with or invent sentences, not an actual thing they observed anybody saying, but the kind of thing, the kind of artificial construction like abortion is morally wrong. That's the sort of thing you might imagine someone saying. And then they'll analyze that. And they'll analyze what that means. But nobody's saying it. It's a toy sentence. It's not an actual sentence anybody is using in any particular context. And to me, I've likened this many times. That's like it's like going to the zoo, looking at some tigers, and then going home and trying to think about tiger behavior and tiger ecology, like how tigers act in the wild, by imagining how you think the tigers that you saw acted at the zoo. So you imagine those tigers, you picture them in your mind, you put them in various hypothetical scenarios, or you imagine what their intentions and motivations were and what their behavioral predilections were. And you go, yeah, now I know all about tiger behavior by thinking about the imaginary tigers that I saw. Well, the imaginary tigers that are based on the actual tigers that I saw, but not in any particular natural environment. This is more or less what philosophers are doing. Maybe they would say, no, 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 you observe tigers in nature. Okay, so someone goes out, sees some tigers in the wild, goes home, really, really, really thinks about tigers a whole lot. And that's going to give them all the knowledge they need about tiger behavior. No, it's not. That's not the way that you understand tigers. You understand tigers by observing them, by doing observational research and conducting studies. You don't figure out what people mean or how people think or what people do or what people are trying to say by thinking about it. You figure it out by conducting psychological research, anthropological research. You don't see philosophers doing this, and yet over and over and over, they just keep making claims about how people think and what people mean without doing any research on this. It's honestly, it's quite embarrassing, and it's especially embarrassing when most of the people doing this are basing this entirely off of the armchair analysis of English sentences and their anecdotal experiences of like students in classrooms and like their uncle at a Thanksgiving dinner. Like they don't have cross-cultural exposure typically. They don't have significant cross-cultural or multilinguistic exposure. They're not thinking about what people say or how people mean things in different languages or different cultures. I've been over this many times before. It's really tedious to sorry to have to rehash this so many times, but my God, just we. Philosophers always talking about we without specifying. But the worst part is they'll say we, and they don't even say everyone, the way everyone thinks, or the way almost everyone thinks, or the way all psychologically normal adults think, or the way all people in contemporary society. There's no specification. They just say we without qualification or specification. It's so who the hell is we? Why do they say that? It's like they all heard somebody else say it, and then they all just started saying it. It's like this weird bandwagon effect where just nobody is like, analytic philosophy is supposed to be about being precise. Okay, then be precise. Who the hell is we? Who is we? Because it's not me. Sapir asks, is this a video you're listening to or just audio? It's just audio. There's no video with this. Frank Pickle says, would you expect moral anti-realists to be more open to changing their mind on a given moral topic, maybe abortion, than moral realists? I don't know. Part of the problem here is that there are going to be a lot of confounds in the psychology of in the kind of person that's a moral anti-realist and a moral realist. And so even if moral anti-realists or realists were more open to changing their mind, that wouldn't necessarily be because of the realism or the anti-realism. It could be other demographic variables. So for instance, at least one of the meta-ethics studies, I think is Feltz and Coakley, they found a positive correlation. I don't think it was especially large, between openness to experience, it's one of the big 5 personality traits, and giving like a relativist or an anti-realist response to meta-ethics questions. So you do have that correlation, and people that are higher in openness may be more likely to change their mind or more intellectually curious or something like that. Problem is that the paradigms used for these studies I don't think that they have valid measures. So I don't think we're really reliably able to measure whether people endorse realism or anti-realism in the first place, because I don't think people understand these questions, and I don't think that realism and anti-realism are a part of everyday thought. So when you ask questions like, would anti-realists be more open to changing their minds than realists? Well, I think anti-realists and realists are almost exclusively philosophers and people that read about, study, or think about philosophy. I think almost nobody in the regular population is a realist or an anti-realist. So, then you're talking about a highly idiosyncratic and unrepresentative group of people, like the people that have actually thought about and taken stances on these things. Think about the kinds of people that take stances on like Newcomb's problem or how to interpret quantum mechanics or something like that. They're not going to be psychologically representative of people in general. And I think the same for people that are realists or anti-realists. So there are too many variables here. I think it's almost pointless to speculate. All right. Looking through the chat. Gary Russ says, hey, is contractualism subject to your moral anti-realism critique? I don't know. I don't think so. You'd have to give me some account of. You'd have to give me some specific account. I would have thought that that would fall within normative ethics. Mason has this joke, like that old joke: if an economist wanted to study a horse, they wouldn't observe horses, but ask, if I were a horse, what would I do? Yeah, I mean, it's very weird for philosophers to just say people think this, people mean this, what we think is this, what we do is that. They don't know this. Yeah, so Barbarism fan says, I'd imagine they'd say we as most people who engage in moral thinking or something like that. Not specific enough. Most people in any particular culture or any particular point in time, how much is most? 51% or 99%? No, you got to be specific. Get specific. We is not good enough. Theology scholar says, are you also skeptical of the existence of propositions or abstract in general? Yes.
The right thing to do. When we engage in this other regarding relational thinking, we implicitly invoke some external standard of conduct, which is to guide our action, and which transcends our particular desires and inclinations in the moment.
You see that? And transcends our desires and inclinations in the moment. This really does sound like they're saying that people are implicitly moral realists. We'll see what they explicitly say about that. But okay, empirical claim, citation needed. There's not any particularly good empirical evidence of that. I've been over this many times on the channel before. Early studies on the psychology of metaethics that specifically look at whether people are realists or anti-realists found mixed responses for whatever reason. Researchers reported this as people lean towards objectivism. It was that I thought that was very misleading. Those reports. I'm not the only one. Thomas Polzer's reanalyzed the data. I think it's in a paper called Revisiting Moral Relativism, or maybe Revisiting Folk Moral Relativism, and reanalyzed it and said, yeah, that's not really what the data looks like. It looks pretty mixed. But there's also a lot of methodological shortcomings with earlier studies like Goodwin and Darley 2008. And subsequent efforts to mitigate at least some of those methodological problems by Polzer, by Jennifer Wright, by Taylor Davis, by James Beebe, all found much higher rates of anti-realist responses, which is not to say that the people responding are anti-realists, but it certainly doesn't. What you're not getting is people looking like consistent realists. So Polzer and Wright in their 2020 paper, Anti-Realist Pluralism, consistently found that about 75% of participants favored anti-realist responses, with a majority of those favoring some type of relativism, either cultural relativism or individual subjectivism. Taylor Davis found that the most common response that people chose was non-cognitivism. James Beebe, when he was when I think he was the first to include non-cognitivist response options, found that it was often the modal response, like the most common for particular items, and it was very common overall. So early studies really kind of allowed you to choose either realism or relativism, which is not, there's other anti-realist positions. If you give people error theory, Polzer and Wright did that. Very few people, like 3, 4, 5% choose that. Not a lot of people pick that. But, they excluded non-cognitivism. And you will sometimes see people say things like, I don't think morality is in the business of, being right or wrong. So, right. So the more recent studies find much higher rates of anti-realism. It's often a majority. Some studies claim not to find that, and I think that's we could get into the details, but what you do not find is compelling evidence that most people are moral realists. The best available evidence finds higher anti-realist response rates than realist response rates, and the Polzer and Wright study in particular has a very consistent anti-realist response rate. That doesn't mean other studies would. There's a variety of other measures out there, but the bottom line is that the most conservative read on the literature is we don't know whether people are realist or anti-realist. So it's rather strange, and that's probably being too conservative. If someone was going to accept the data at face value, it looks like probably a lot of people are anti-realists, at least in the populations that have been tested. And Pulsar's recently did a cross-cultural study and found similar results in various cultures that were studied. I forget what all they were. I think it's at least includes the United States and Japan. I forget where else. So what we don't have is, it looks like people are realists. We don't have data like that. So I don't know where realists are getting this from. I don't know why they say this.
In other words, we adopt an ethical stance. Alongside adopting this ethical stance is the belief that our answers to these questions provide an overriding motive for acting or refraining from acting in certain ways, approving and disapproving of certain states of affairs, and illuminates what is ultimately valuable and worthy of promotion, and sometimes what we should, at great costs, strive to prevent. The ethical stance seems to require of us a definitive answer to those prickly questions. If it is to be more than an expression of some internalized cultural norms or just a metastasized egoism. According to some philosophers, what the ethical stance appears to require are objective facts, facts about what acts are right and what acts are wrong.
Yeah, so they are coming out and saying it pretty explicitly. It's not clear if they're attributing that to people or they're saying that themselves. Let me take it back a second.
What the ethical stance appears to require are objective facts.
Yeah, pretty darn clear, but it's not clear whether they're saying most people think that the ethical stance requires objective facts or whether they're inferring that on the basis of some view about common sense morality or something or other considerations that they haven't got to yet. It's not super clear exactly what they mean by that, but this is clearly coming down on the side of moral realism. All right. Barbarism fan says, do you know how people would tend to respond to questions like, would X be wrong even if you didn't think it was? Obviously, answering yes is compatible with all sorts of ethical views, but that seems like the central question realists want to say it's common sense to say yes to. I have addressed this very extensively on my blog. So go check out the blog Lance Independent, where I talk about that question. So if you ask people stuff like, if there was a world where everybody approved of torturing babies for fun, would it still be wrong for them to torture babies for fun? I think most people would say yes. I do not think that is in any way an indication that they are moral realists. I would say yes to that question. Those kinds of questions are highly ambiguous. They're very weird, and there are serious problems with them. Travis also has a great video on this. It's only about 7 minutes long, or he's a lot more concise than me. Let me see if I could find a link to that. Give me a moment. And I would say that I think thoroughly purges the notion that that's a good question to ask. So would people say yes to would it be wrong in those sorts of scenarios where it's like a counterfactual? Would it be wrong? Like if a bunch of people thought some bad thing was good, would it be good? I think people would say no. And I do not think that means that they are moral realists. I think it's terrible, terrible question to ask people. And anyway, Travis has a good video. Let me see if I can find it. 1 second. I did indeed find it, and here it is. So I threw it in the chat, and I'll pin it. All right, so go check out that video after this one. And again, I think it's like 7 minutes, so it's definitely worth. It's not my 50-hour. Yeah, 7 minutes and 32 seconds. Oh, and let's check if I hit 2,000 subscribers. I did not. So I got 28 people watching. If one of you is not subscribed, I'm at 1,999 subscribers. So just if you hit subscribe right now, you will be the 2,000 person. So you'll be that special person that pushes me over that threshold. Still at 1,999. Maybe it takes a while for it to update. I don't know. But yeah, Barbarism fan. That's a great question you asked. I address it on my blog, but Travis handles it very effectively in that video. So just check out that video. All right. See what else people have to say. If I don't get through reviewing much of the video now, that's totally fine. I like talking to my audience. Frank Pickle says, how do you determine a mind-independent fact without using your mind? You could use your mind to determine mind-independent facts. That's not a problem. Mind-independent does not mean it's somehow true in a way where you couldn't know about it. It does not mean that you can't access it using a mind or else it's mind dependent to know about it. That's not what the view is. The view is that what it is that makes the claim true is not some mental state you have with respect to or like fixing the truth of that statement. So, and that would be something like a preference or a belief or a value or something like that. Something isn't true because you believe it's true. Something isn't made true because you prefer that it's true. Something isn't made true because of some attitude or feeling that you have. That's what it means for something to be stance independent or mind independent. It isn't made true by your beliefs or your attitudes or by cultural consensus or some other sort of mental states or attitudes that individuals or groups have. So it does not mean that moral facts don't depend in other sorts of ways on minds. So, for instance, it could be stance independently true that it's wrong to cause unnecessary harm to people. But of course, it would be true that you couldn't harm somebody unless they had a mind. And so, in a certain sense, the wrongness of harming people that requires minds. But that's not the same dependency relation as the truth making nature of the of what stance independence is all about. Sorry, I'm getting this thing where I start talking and then my throat it gets all gravelly. Um, so something is stance independently true when it's not made true by stances or attitudes. That does not mean that what it is that's true couldn't in some way only occur, or if a mind is present or some mental state occurs or something like that. It's just a different dependency relation. So if you really want to like have a slightly clearer way of describing it, you could say that stance independent moral facts are not made true by attitudes, preferences, or other mental states, and that stance dependent moral facts are made true by attitudes or preferences or values or whatever. And of course, a lot of I'm using a lot of like non-technical term, belief, value, attitude. I'm not using these in any like highly specific, refined, philosophically robust way. I'm throwing folk terms at you. So that's why I often kind of give people a grab bag of those, because there's a variety of terms that you could use. And I'm not trying to regiment them into some highly specific, I'm not, trying to be like Spinoza and have like this set of axioms and say, given this axiom and given this principle, I'm not trying to do that. All right. Let's see what else people have to say. And people in the audience giving examples to try to explain mind dependence versus independence. Cool. Thank you.
Or just a metastasized egoism. According to some philosophers, what the ethical stance appears to require are objective facts, facts about what acts are right and what acts are wrong. Objectivity is a notoriously contentious concept, and there are competing accounts of the conditions under which our descriptive and moral claims turn out true or false. Nevertheless, what is not contested is that our ordinary moral language implicitly invokes external standards when we speak of the right and of the good.
Wow. So that is a big problem. Look what they just said. So it looks like they're saying it's contested whether or not morality is objective, but what's not contested is that ordinary language implicitly presupposes realism or objectivism. Yes, it is contested. I mean, first of all, I'm not the first person to contest this. First of all of the standard anti-realist accounts, aside from error theory, do contest this. They are semantic analyses of ordinary moral language, which purport to cash it out in terms of non-objectivist accounts. So non-cognitivism and, these days people just say expressivism, but those sorts of accounts say, look, moral claims are not in their typical usage are not used to express propositional claims. They're used to express non-propositional content like attitudes or like emotions or something, or imperatives or something like that. So those views would argue, no, it's not the case that our ordinary moral claims implicitly presuppose realism. Same thing for relativists and various types of constructivists. They would deny this too. So, I mean, that the idea that this is not contested is simply false, historically speaking. But I certainly contest it. I don't think that people implicitly presuppose realism, even if this weren't controversial among philosophers. Like, let's say it turned out all philosophers, for whatever reason, said everybody implicitly presupposes realism. Okay, well, they're not the experts on what people implicitly presuppose. That's a question for linguists, cognitive scientists, psychologists, anthropologists, not philosophers. Philosophers are not the experts on how people think. So one, they can't just rely on their straight appeal to authority. Two, this is an empirical question. Questions about what people implicitly presuppose are psychological questions. And the philosophers who think this way have not presented compelling empirical evidence that this is what people presuppose. Like, what are they basing this on? Again, personal experience, anecdote, armchair analysis of English sentences. These, I'm sorry to say, these are, you know what? I'm not even that sorry to say it. These are crappy methods. These are not good ways to figure out how people think. You find out how people think using like psychology and anthropology. Is that, what shouldn't be contested? That like psychology, the field that studies human thought and behavior, that is the appropriate field for studying, oh, I don't know, human thought and behavior, and that it's not philosophy. What the hell? So weird for philosophers to just confidently make psychological claims and not do any psychology. But I've already made that point. I don't want to keep stressing that too much.
What remains for us to discern is not only what our ethical statements mean, but under the assumption that some of these statements are true, what is their peculiar character? How can statements purporting to describe a fact about the world at the same time constrain our action beyond serving as an internal justification of what we contingently desire or as an ad hoc realization of what we ultimately do? Are there such things as moral facts that we apprehend and commend not because they appeal to our emotions or our prejudices, but because they are genuine instances of knowledge?
In order to answer these questions, we are taking a detour into a foreign territory of seemingly strange concepts, outrageous thought experiments, and fine-grained distinctions, the world of analytic metaethics. What has affectionately or derisively, depending on who you ask, come to be known as the analytic philosophical tradition emerges at the beginning of the 20th century. In reaction to the concomitant disillusionment with the speculative system-building philosophy that dominated the 19th century and the demonstrable material success and alleged supremacy of the scientific method, philosophers in Europe and the United States felt pressured to make philosophy respectable, namely more scientific. In response to the intellectual and cultural pressure to purge the excesses of speculative philosophy and ground philosophical investigation in the verifiable methods of science, many philosophers attempted to reproduce the rigor of science by reconceiving philosophy as means of logical and semantic analysis. No longer was it intellectually respectable to call metaphysics the queen of the sciences. In fact, many, and especially a group of philosophers known as the logical positivists, came to believe that much of metaphysical speculation was not only misguided, but meaningless, a product of an inattentiveness to semantics. From this line of thought emerged the idea that our ordinary moral language was plagued with errors, arising from a failure to disambiguate the meaning of terms, or worse yet, affix a meaning to words signifying concepts with no possible referent. From this
Sounds pretty good to me. Sounds like they were on the right track.
perspective, it turned out that a lot of cherished concepts were nonsense. At the same time as the logical positivists were discarding much of the metaphysical systems built over centuries, another group of rigorously minded, but less thoroughly skeptical philosophers counter the positivist deconstruction of ordinary language usage with a suggestion that perhaps there is wisdom, or true knowledge, contained in our inherited language usage, most especially in our normative vocabulary. These philosophers counter the positivists, while acknowledging the value and success of the empirical method, suggest that it is not possible for the tools of empiricism to illuminate the arena of moral values. In order to understand value, claims about meaningfulness or what is good, beautiful, right, and true, we have no better guide than our thinking and acting. If we want to know what is of lasting value to us, what we ought to pursue, what is right and wrong, then we must turn to experience and reflection to see whether we can discover any general principles. Today's discussion will concern not what particular actions are right, but the meta question of how we determine what actions are right. What characterizes right action? Is there one feature that makes all acts right? Is this feature something that empirical investigation can identify, or are there seemingly queer moral properties that we ascertain in some other way? Welcome back, Charles, to our second episode of Moral Minority.
It's great to be here. Welcome to you as well.
We are today seemingly pivoting in a big way from our first episode, which focused on Nietzsche. We are now moving to a rather different tradition of thought, looking at early 20th century and to some extent later 20th century analytic metaethics. And this, I think, might strike some of our listeners as a strange decision, but I think I would justify the choice by saying Nietzsche at the end of the 19th century gives us this incredibly powerful and provocative critique of any attempt to ground moral values in the objective nature of the world. And this is essential to his idea of the death of God, that the fact that we can no longer believe in the Christian God also is connected with this disenchantment of the world, or we also can't believe in traditional moral values either. And obviously this is an argument we covered in some detail. But here we're turning to what we both take to be a fairly sophisticated case for the opposite, that comes a little bit later at the beginning of the 20th century, that is trying to make the case that no, our best account of our ordinary moral judgments and the truth that they involve is that they are objective in some fashion, that they're objectively true. And this is the moral realist position that we'll examine. And I think when we were discussing the idea for some of these episodes, one of the reasons was the kind of shared sense that at least in some of the communities that we're in, moral subjectivism seems to be the dominant or at least intuitive position rather than moral realism. And last episode, we briefly touched on moral subjectivism as the idea that moral...
It sounds great. I want to know what these communities are. I wish I was around more spaces where anti-realism was the norm.
Statements don't have any particular truth value, but serve rather to express preferences about what I desire, or perhaps serve to allow me to influence your behavior in some way. But they can't be true or false. And we're going to get into these distinctions in a more nuanced way in this episode. But I think in contrast with this, it's striking that, I was looking at the 2020 Phil Papers survey, which surveys, roughly 1,500 or so professional philosophers on their views on a variety of issues, in which are included metaethics and moral.
More than that, because if I recall correctly, it's 1,785 that respond just to the metaethics question. Do I have that number right? I think I do.
Judgment, and it's quite striking that there's,
or maybe that's the responses in total. Let's check it. I'm just curious. Main survey results. Yeah, it's 1,785 total. And then the realism question had 1,719 responses. So most of them answered the question.
Staunch majorities. So 62% of professional academic philosophers favor moral realism in metaethics over anti-realism.
Let me take that back. Professional interrupted in the middle.
Philosophers on their views on a variety of issues, in which are included metaethics and moral judgment. And it's quite striking that there's staunch majorities. So 62%.
Yeah, I don't know why people call that a staunch majority. I mean, if we're talking about an election, 62% is going to be a very strong majority. But if we're talking about the perspectives of specialists or people that work within a particular field, 62% is not that impressive. It's not even 2/3. It's, if you were comparing 62 versus 38%, you're talking, about what? 60 to, it's like 60 to 40, basically. I mean, that's not that big of a difference. I don't know why people call that a staunch majority. Here's the survey results for you to look at.
Of professional academic philosophers favor moral realism in metaethics over anti-realism. 69%, according to this 2020 survey, favor cognitivism in moral judgment over non-cognitivism, with in each case a alternative, neither or some combination of both being the third answer. So these are quite substantial majorities. And it's striking how much that seems to contrast with both of our perceptions of a kind of intuitive idea of metaethics in popular culture these days. So I think in that case, given this contrast, let's start out by laying out what this position consists in. What is moral realism in its nuts and bolts? What is it basically trying to argue?
Moral realism has two prongs. The view is committed to a semantic thesis about the meaning of moral statements or moral claims. And on a deeper level, it's committed to an ontological thesis about the actual status of our moral evaluations.
I've always found this really weird. It's this odd feature of analytic philosophy and the way it approaches these questions. And it results in having this linguistic component and so it has this semantic thesis and a metaphysical thesis. And why do you need the semantic thesis? If there's stance-independent moral facts, there's stance-independent moral facts. Why do you need a specific semantic thesis to support this? There's one paper, it's a Kahan paper that says, must moral realism make a semantic claim? The paper argues, no, it doesn't require a semantic claim. I'm pretty sympathetic to that. I don't know why realists and anti-realists alike in analytic metaethics. I mean, I know why, like historically, but in terms of how you think about these things, what's the semantic claim for? It's so weird to insist on a claim about the meaning of sentences as a way of addressing metaphysical questions.
The semantic thesis, the moral realist, takes what is known in the literature as a cognitivist position, namely that moral statements purport to convey or indicate facts about the world. That in addition to our normal everyday descriptive facts, they're also evaluated facts.
Yeah, so when they make these sorts of theses, are these intended to be empirical theses about human psychology? Like, here's what most people mean when they make these claims? Or are they claims about like the intrinsic meaning of sentences, some category of sentences? How do they determine what category of sentences moral sentences are? Like, what counts as a moral sentence and what doesn't? Is that determined a priori? Like, the whole thing is just very obscure. It's very weird what philosophers take themselves to be doing here. Which parts of this are empirical and which parts aren't? I mean, if none of this is empirical, then how the hell can these be theories about ordinary language? Isn't that like an empirical phenomenon? Like, the whole thing is very, very strange. Yeah, because if you say it has nothing to do with empirical considerations, and then you do all this a priori analysis stuff, and then you determine that moral sentences purport to express propositions. What if we then went out and did empirical research and we found that in 0% of actual cases of non-philosophers using moral claims, like saying things that look like moral claims, like abortion is wrong. Like we find that in 100% of those cases, they're only expressing emotions and they're never intending to report propositions. Would we conclude that they're not engaged in moral language? So you would actually take all the real world instances of people saying stuff like that's wrong and that's immoral and say, yeah, none of that is moral language. Moral language is this like hypothetical thing that no normal humans ever actually do. I mean, that'd be ridiculous. Or you could say the meaning of their sentences isn't determined by what they intend to communicate. Okay, so it's determined by what? By your armchair analysis, not by what the people are trying to do? That's weird. So if it is determined by what they intend to do, then it's an empirical question. And then if that's the case, why the hell aren't you doing empirical work? You see what I'm saying? Like either you got to take super bizarro views about the way language works, or you're making empirical claims and then nobody engages in the empirical research. It's so weird.
So when I say or make the claim murder is wrong, that has a truth value. It is true in virtue of some fact about the world. That is cognitivism on the semantic level. The second prong is an ontological claim, namely that there are such things like moral concepts that point or indicate real properties in the world, that within the statement murder is wrong is contained the property wrongness. So whenever there is an instance of murder, there's a states of affairs that obtains. That is the working definition in the analytical literature for fact, a state of affair that obtains. That means that in the state of affairs in which murder takes place, wrongness obtains. Wrongness is a property within that natural description.
So just imagine thinking that people implicitly think this way, that there's like properties and stuff. This is not how people think. And if philosophers think it is, present empirical evidence of that. Otherwise, I'm calling straight bullshit on that. This is a highly artificial way of thinking about things that philosophers invented. I don't see any particularly good reason to think that that's the way that ordinary people think. And again, if someone thinks that, they're welcome to do the psychological work to show that that's the case. I don't think it's been done.
So in addition to the natural descriptions of the world, we also have these evaluative descriptions, which are true. That's moral cognitivism. Moral realism is the combination of those two prongs. It is a cognitive approach to the meaning of moral statements, that moral statements indeed have a truth value, that they're actually describing facts in the world. They're not doing something else, like expressing some desire or some preference or some emotive, reactive attitude, but they're actually describing facts in the world. And on a deep ontological level, there are such things as evaluative facts.
Let's dwell on the first prong here for a moment. Before getting to the ontological question, let's look at the semantic question of the meaning of moral judgments. Because my first reaction, in part, is to say, well, of course, it's intuitive or in some ways obvious that when I say you ought not to commit murder, I'm not trying, at least consciously, to either just influence your action or express my own desire. I seem to mean something distinct from that.
It's like when they say intuitively, what do they mean? Whose intuitions? Like their
But
own
at
intuitions?
the course,
Take us back.
it's intuitive or in some ways obvious meaning of moral judgments. Because let's dwell on the first prong here for a moment. Before getting to the ontological question, let's look at the semantic question of the meaning of moral judgments. Because my first reaction, in part, is to say, well, of course, it's intuitive or in some ways obvious that when I say you ought not to commit murder, I'm not trying, at least consciously, to either just influence your action or express my own desire.
Okay. Well, I would be. That's what I'm doing. This is it's obvious, self-evident that. So notice language when I say this. If you're reporting your own psychology, that's fine. But the fact that you think that doesn't put you in a good position to know how other people think, what they're conscious of, or how they're thinking about things. Now, do I think that when most people go around saying that's wrong, that they're thinking, how can I get this person to do what I want? No, but I also think that it's not the case that they're thinking that there are stance independent moral facts. I don't think people are thinking through like some theoretical commitments at all in any respect. Realist or anti-realist. Again, I do not think that most people are anti-realists. I just think that they're not realists either. I don't think theoretical commitments are underpinning the way that people use moral language. I think that moral language is serving various practical socio-functional goals in the relevant contexts of usage. Some of those usages, in some cases, very narrowly construed, might better fit a realist or an anti-realist analysis in principle, but it's not going to be capturing any real features of the psychology of the people. At least I don't think so. In other cases, I think in probably the majority of cases, neither realism nor anti-realism is going to better account for what we're observing, because what we're observing is indeterminate between the two. So I just don't see any particularly good reason to think, well, because no, like someone saying, okay, well, they're not consciously trying to manipulate people or express an emotion or issue or something like that. Sure, true, okay. It doesn't follow that therefore they're trying to appeal to stance independent moral facts, or that they think that the actions they refer to in the world, like torturing someone, somehow instantiate the property of moral badness or something like that. That is just as, if not a lot more implausible than the people being anti-realist. At least I think so. So when realists talk about things being intuitive in a way that seems to lean towards realism, I don't have those intuitions. Two, they're typically not clear about whose intuitions they're talking about. And three, if they are making claims about other people's intuitions, they're not in a good epistemic position to make those sorts of claims. I mean, notice one thing they said is that they were kind of surprised at the Phil Paper survey results because the sort of pop cultural sentiment seems to be leaning towards anti-realism. Okay, then why are you so confident that moral language implicitly presupposes realism? Those seem to have at least some tension with one another. So I don't understand where the confidence is that people are implicitly appealing to the existence of moral properties that would comport with realism. It seems like it's not coming from anywhere other than people extrapolating from their own position. So realists think people are realists. Why? Because they're realists. What? I don't think, well, hey, it's obvious to me that anti-realism is the correct position to take on this, so it must be obvious to everybody. What a weird way to think. That's weird. If you want to know how people think, ask them. And if they don't understand your questions, explain what you mean. People should just have conversations with people, not make assumptions about what they mean or what they think. It's very, very strange. I don't know why philosophers do this.
I seem to mean something distinct from that. But at the same time, this seems to run into problems already, as you've kind of laid out. It seems the alternative is accepting that there's something like moral facts or qualities that adhere in states of affairs in the world in somewhat a similar way that physical properties do.
Notice they say, so the alternative is, so we don't think one way, so the alternative is to think this other way. No, you could think in neither way. So this is an option that's not typically on the table for most people. They seem to think if you could show that people aren't anti-realists, that shows that they're realist. That doesn't follow. A person can be neither a realist nor an anti-realist. So let's say you take the propositions, say you define atheism as the belief that God does not exist, and then theism is the belief that God does exist. If you went out and analyzed a bunch of people's behavior on some other world, some other planet, and let's say that people have never had a concept of God, they never thought about God, they don't have a position on God, which would they be, atheists or theists? Well, do they believe God doesn't exist? No. Do they believe God does exist? No. So they're neither of those by those definitions. So realism and anti-realism are not the only conceptually possible positions that a person could take on metaethical issues. There's another possibility, which is that they don't have a position on the matter. And this is what I think is the most plausible explanation for how non-philosophers speak and think when it comes to morality. And yet, for whatever reason, people seem to think they got to be one or the other. They don't have to be one or the other.
So I think this seems to be maybe the point of puzzlement, right? That on the one hand, we can pretty easily understand how a non-cognitivist view, maybe it makes sense of what we're really trying to do on an unconscious level with our moral judgments. Maybe in an unconscious level, I'm really just trying to influence your behavior, or I'm really judging what is best for me to be best morally. But on a surface level of what the meaning of the utterance actually seems to be, it seems.
So that's very strange. So on some unconscious level, I'm trying to influence your behavior, but then on a surface level, the meaning of what the statement happens to be, let me get exactly what they said.
Judging what is best for me to be best morally. But on a surface level of what the meaning of the utterance actually seems to be.
The meaning of the utterance. All right, let's see what they say about this.
It seems that there's a stronger case to be made by pressing upon this issue of moral properties and what analogy these are supposed to have with physical properties.
Nah, I don't buy that. And they didn't say more about language yet, but what the sentences mean, what the utterances mean. I do worry about that because I don't think sentences, utterances, locutions, speech acts, whatever, however you want to characterize what people are doing, whether it be written or spoken. Philosophers often talk about the sentences meaning things. And to me, that raises a red flag. Uh, it's like talking about what an argument argues. Arguments don't argue things. People argue using an argument. Sentences don't mean things. People use sentences to mean things. It's the people that mean things, not the sentences. Now, if you want to use the sentences meaning as a shorthand for, talking about what the people that use the sentence mean by it, that's fine. I mean, I think we should get over speaking that way. I probably fall into the habit of speaking that way because everybody does. But really, the sentences themselves don't mean things. Sentences are tools. They're a behavior. They're a method people use to convey things. And what is it that people want to convey? Their thoughts, their goals, their attitudes, their feelings. It's people that are using language as it's a type of behavior. It's a communicative act, and the intention is for the speaker to communicate something. Sentences themselves don't have meanings. What the hell would that even mean? How would a sentence have a meaning? So I've seen people scoff at this. I scoff at you. You could scoff. I could scoff harder. So, if you want to scoff at the idea that of me saying sentences literally have no meaning, fuck off. One of these weird things that people do in philosophy is they think that their bafflement and incredulity is somehow supposed to intimidate me into feeling bad about the positions that I have. No, I'm not going to do that. Sentences don't mean things. So, look what I'm doing right now. I'm like flapping my mouth and making sounds. There's no freaking metaphysical magic here. This is some crap that an ape figured out how to do, and we do it to achieve our goals. So the moment philosophers lose sight of the fact that language developed to facilitate human goal success and to do things is the moment that they start treating it in a way that is fundamentally misguided. Language is ultimately for our purposes. It's a tool that we use. It isn't some weird mystical way of tapping into the platonic fabric of the fundamental nature of the universe. And yet they treat sentences like they have meanings independent of us. It's so weird. Now, they're not doing that here. Maybe they do think that way, but nothing that they've said reveals their specific views about the nature of language. But, I run into so many analytic philosophers that do so. And you see hints of that in the way in which analytic metaethics is framed with all these semantic theses. Why? What are they doing? And why is it so unclear what they're doing? If they're making empirical claims or not. It's so strange. The whole thing is very strange. And the thing is, analytic philosophers, they think in all these strange ways. They buy in all these strange dogmas and presuppositions. They employ these weird methods. They go around talking about intuitions as if that's a normal thing. It's not normal. It's really weird. That's not how anybody solves problems in pretty much any other field. It's very strange what philosophers do. But they steep themselves in this. They read a bunch of philosophy. They talk to a bunch of philosophers. And they internalize this being the norm so much that they then all mutually convince one another that anybody that doesn't think the way they do is weird, and they act all incredulous and they scoff at them. The whole thing is so strange. All this talk of properties, everything is properties. That's not how anybody talks outside of philosophy. This is how philosophers talk. They might say, but once you understand. Yeah, once I understand, it started to look like a bunch of bullshit to me. It looked like a bunch of linguistically confused bullshit. I think Wittgenstein is basically right about what analytic philosophers are up to. A bunch of confusion about language. That's what I think is going on. And I'm not the only one to think that. So it's like philosophers like dupe themselves into their own dogmas and then act like everybody else is weird if they don't go along with it. It's so strange. I experience just almost perpetual pressure to bow and conform and bend the knee to the methodological presuppositions of philosophers. They practically browbeat people, and you have to have intuitions. You have to have intuitions. You must use intuitions to do philosophy. Foundationalist philosophers love saying this stuff. No, we don't need them to do philosophy. I deny. And they'll self-defeating. You got to have them. I don't agree with you. And if they want to sit down and have a metaphilosophical discussion, I'm happy to do that. But what I won't do is just sit by idly while someone just says, you must. Philosophers obsessed with this. William James talked about philosophers, how desperately they cling to their musts. It's so frustrating. All this, you must do this. You have to think this way. They try to put you in their own conceptual straitjackets and force you to think the way that they do. And my answer is no, I'm not doing that. And they've been able to fairly successfully relegate every dissident philosophical movement that questioned this this weird dogmatic mainstream analytic philosophical approach. They managed to sideline everything. Ordinary language philosophy, the people said's dead. Logical positivism, dead. Pragmatism might as well be dead. In that case, what they did is they reabsorbed it into the analytic fold and turned it into some Frankenstein analytic pragmatism that's not even real pragmatism. And I am using real there with a tone of intentional contempt. Pragmatism is James and Schiller and some other people, but it's not what we're seeing from people, these days that will say they're pragmatists. This rarely, pragmatism in its genuinely like anti-analytic form. Schiller was very much a critic of contemporary philosophy of his day, and likewise made quite disparaging remarks about intuitions and reliance on them. And that term has only ballooned in its usage. And he did explicitly talk about intuitions, which is interesting because there's been a lot of uptick in the use of the term. So philosophers have employed this similar type of like weird, this like like truth tingle approach, like they just have direct access to truths. They've been doing that for a long time, but use of the term intuition has really seen an uptick. I don't remember if it's Herman Capellan or who has cataloged the frequency of the use of the term intuition in philosophical literature, but someone did somewhere. I forget who. I know I saw it in some paper or book. Yeah, Matt Springfield says the classic philosophical argument. I mean, come on. Yeah, you do get philosophers that do this. And it's so disappointing because of all the disciplines where you think that people would be receptive to contrary ways of thinking, you get philosophers trying to go, come on, what are you trying to do? Just it's like, hey, just think the way I do. Stop fighting. Stop resisting the intellectual dogma that I'm foisting on you. Yeah, I am resisting, and I'm not going to be shamed into changing my position on these things. But they'll try it. They'll keep doing it. They'll call you conceptually impoverished. They'll say you're disingenuous or bad faith. They'll pull all the shit. It's not going to work. It just pisses me off.
That there's a stronger case to be made by pressing upon this issue of moral properties and what analogy these are supposed to have with physical properties.
So I think it's important here to clear up what non-cognitivism is. And once again, non-cognitivism is a view about moral semantics, about the meaning and function of moral statements in our language. We've already elaborated that cognitivism takes our moral statements to be true in some objective sense, that they point to something in the world, value inheres in the fabric of the universe. That's cognitivism. Non-cognitivism, what motivates this, and we spoke a little bit about this in our introduction to what's going on in the 20th century in analytic metaethics, is the idea that the way that we express ourselves, our common sense understanding of moral statements might be fundamentally mistaken. That what appear to be descriptive facts, descriptive value facts about the world are not that at all.
Yeah, so I just deny that they appear to be descriptive value facts. So this presumption of that common sense morality is committed in some way to realism. I don't think it's true.
These philosophers are interested in is interrogating our normal or ordinary language usage and seeing what's behind.
See, look at this.
Are not that at all. What these philosophers are interested in is interrogating our normal or ordinary language usage.
Philosophers are interested in interrogating our ordinary linguistic practices or ordinary, whatever specifically they said. Let's get the exact wording.
And see value facts about the world. Are not that at all. What these philosophers are interested in is interrogating our normal or ordinary language usage. And
our normal or ordinary language usage. I would like them to say with a straight face that that's not an empirical question. That's very strange. And if so, the dilemma, I've thought about calling it the empiricist dilemma. If they think that those sorts of questions are not empirical, I think an empiricist should reject that presupposition and say, no, I think they are empirical. And if you disagree, we're going to have to argue that out. And if they say they are empirical, then I think empiricists should say, then why aren't you using empirical methods? So an empiricist is not obliged to grant both that that the relevant questions about ordinary language, like what people mean when they make moral claims, that they're not empirical questions, and that the answer to those questions is that people speak or think like realists. It's going to be if they disagree that whether it's an empirical question, the empiricist has grounds to say, I think these questions are empirical questions. So we have a more fundamental disagreement. And if they agree it is an empirical question, then empiricists can say, then why aren't you using empirical methods? It's a very strange thing for you to be doing this from the armchair. And so I don't really think that there's a way to just blow past the empiricist concerns on the matter, because one way or another, empiricists are in a position to have issues with this approach. The problem is a lot of empiricists don't seem to appreciate that certain sorts of questions are in fact best handled using empirical methods, even though they're nominally empiricists. Oh, it's an empirical question, but we can handle it from the armchair. How the hell do they know that? How did they figure that out? Like, why is it okay if you're doing what effectively amounts to psychology to just decide from the armchair what sorts of issues you can determine from the armchair? How would you know that without doing the appropriate empirical research? Maybe it's the case that philosophers are such incredible experts on ordinary language that they actually can infer what people's philosophical positions are by thinking about it without doing empirical research. Okay, let's say that that's because it's possible. Okay, do we have empirical evidence corroborating the fact that they can do that? No, we don't. We do not have evidence that philosophers are good at intuiting the way ordinary people speak or think. We don't have evidence of that, or at least not compelling evidence of that. So even if philosophers could do that, they've never demonstrated that they could do that. So they're still not entitled to just presume they could do this. It's so weird. There's no way to get around the fact that we have empirical questions to address here, and they're just not addressing them. Very right. I don't know when this happened, but thank you all for everybody here. I got 3 more subscribers. I have officially passed 2,000 subscribers. So I think that maybe that's cause for celebration. I don't have any champagne. I don't have anything to drink. I have a glass of water. That's all I got. That's all I got. Maybe I need to change the color of my background. I don't know. What can I do to celebrate? Change the color. What color should I change it to? We could do a vote. All right. Give me 1 second. All right. I gave you some options. Pick from among those, and then we'll go for that. All right, everybody. So 2,000 subscribers. Oh, wow. Thanks so much, Nitty. So Nitty has given me $10. So 1,000K cents for 2K subs. Nice. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. That's very cool. I'm getting lots of congrats. Carlos says congrats. Jackass says congrats. Mason says scotch and cigars. I do have some whiskey. I don't have any cigars, and I wouldn't smoke them anyway. Not big on smoking. But I don't feel like doing a shot of whiskey right now. Sapir says congrats. Carlos says ha ha ha. Mason says victory, congratulations. Really appreciate it, everybody. Mason asked if there's any good pragmatists. I know of some, but not everybody is like public, so I don't really want to talk about people. Like I have friends, colleagues that I think do amazing work, but they're not people that want to like be on YouTube and stuff for very, very understandable reasons. So I will respect their privacy and not mention who they are. But there's great people out there. There's people that I think are very much on the right track philosophically and are further along than me and are certainly better at addressing a broader range of issues than I am. Asthor says, "Hey, hi Lance. I've been wondering if you've heard of a YouTuber." Okay, who are you referring to? We'll keep Nitty up here. Really appreciate that. So nice of you. That's really cool. You know, I still don't know how I feel about receiving these sorts of things online. I don't know if I do enough. I'm just doing a goofy stream. Well, I've seen people throw money at people for doing less than I think I do. At least it took a lot of reading and thinking and learning to get where I'm at now. Not as much as I would like though. Too narrow. I really want to get into other topics. Andrew Moy says, with that, we have defeated moral realism forever and have demonstrated the stance of dependent superiority of moral anti-realism. I don't think we're there yet. All right, let's do a couple more minutes of the video, and then I'm going to head out. I only got 14 minutes into it, so it's probably going to be a 3, maybe 4-parter. We'll see. I mean, I had some preliminary remarks to make, that sort of thing. So sometimes they go a little slower at the beginning.
Value facts about the world, common sense understanding of moral statements might be fundamentally mistaken. That what appear to be descriptive facts, descriptive value facts about the world, are not that at all. What these philosophers are interested in is interrogating our normal or ordinary language usage and seeing what's behind, what is the social function of our moral statements. And some philosophers, known as the non-cognitivists, take our moral statements like murder is wrong, not to be expressing or purporting something that is true of the world, namely that there is this property or attribute of wrongness that inheres in any instance of murder, but merely expressing some subjective reactive attitude, namely like, when I say murder is wrong, I'm not making a claim about some fact, but I'm expressing my disapproval of murder. I'm saying something like, boo, murder. Or I'm doing something further than that. I'm performing the act of commending to others that they should share my attitude towards murder, namely disapproval. So non-cognitivism turns on what is the correct analysis, the logical, semantical analysis of the function of moral statements in our language.
Yeah, so it seems to me that is a little easier to grant than the second part, the part that seems to involve certain ontological commitments. And we talked, for example, in the last episode, I think the passage from Dawn that we started with is actually quite a good example of these debates, where Nietzsche is in fact distinguishing between these two sorts of positions. He's saying he denies morality because he denies alchemy, not that there aren't plenty of alchemists who believe that they were really doing something called alchemy, but that they were actually accomplishing anything thereby. Right?
So Nietzsche in this passage appears to be taking a cognitive position. He says, yes, our ordinary moral statements do appear to be describing facts in the world. That seems to be what they're doing. But on a deeper level, on an ontological level, is there really a basis? Can we make sense of this idea that there are such things as value facts that inhere in the world, that there's a property of rightness or wrongness or goodness or badness? And Nietzsche's answer, although it doesn't map exactly onto this cartography of moral realism, anti-realism, cognitism, anti-cognitism, appears to be that no, that we are fundamentally mistaken about this ontological reality. Language has deceived us. And there is an affinity that Nietzsche shares with the non-cognitivists that emerged at the beginning of the 20th century in the analytic tradition.
Yeah, and that's quite interesting because it seems like you can make the case that they're both responding to a similar sort of collapse of traditional values in one sense, because we're trying to reformulate this and see whether we can reformulate this on the terrain of a language of validity provided by modern science in forms of expression such as computational logic that began to develop at the end of the 19th century.
Hi, everybody. I think that the stream cut out. Here for a minute. Let's see if I could bring the. I think that's the first time my internet has just gone out in the middle of a video. I haven't seen that happen before. All right. Okay. So I should be back. I don't know what happened there. That was kind of exciting for the internet to just cut out like that. Sorry about that, everybody. All right. Let's see where we're at. Got Harmonica Luke saying, hey, we're back. Carlos asks, do you have a favorite scene in a show or film or moment in a book story that you find philosophically interesting or profound? Doesn't have to be intentional or intended for the scene. Oof. I have to stop and think about it. I don't know. That's a tough question because I have to start thinking through all the movies and shows that I've seen. I don't know. I'd have to think about it. That's a good question. Maybe that's a question for my Q&A, but I don't know. So Asthor had earlier asked if I'd heard of somebody before and says, the guy I'm referring to is Tom Jump. Yeah, I know who Tom Jump is. I've probably referenced him a few times on the channel. I've watched pretty much every video he's done on metaethics and his case for moral realism. Not sure what to think of him. Well, I think a lot of people are quite mean to Tom Jump, or T Jump, if people typically call him, and I don't think that they should be. I think we need a lot less toxicity on the internet. So I don't like that. I've made some jokes before. I kind of feel bad about some of them, but I mean, we should be able to joke a bit about each other, but I think people can go too far. I don't think that his moral theory is very, very well thought out or very well defended. I think he tends to get impatient with people that question him. A lot of the people that question or challenge him on his moral views don't do a very good job. They keep shifting between. Well, a lot of times I say shifting between. They shift between meta ethics and normative ethics, but they often just end up focusing on the normative ethical component of his views, not on his meta ethics. And I think that's a mistake. I think more people need to challenge him on his meta ethical views. So I don't know what else you might want to know about that. Give me a moment. Got to fix my settings since everything just sort of collapsed. Okay, got them fixed that time. That was quick. Yeah. So, like Pierce says, T Jump, as far as I understand, has no idea what he's talking about regarding moral realism. It's a bit harsh, but yeah, I wouldn't go so far as to say that. But what I would say is, if you if when people ask him, like, how do you figure out what the moral facts are, he just tends to say convergence intuitions, and he doesn't elaborate, and he doesn't seem to want to elaborate, and that concerns me a bit. Like, what kind of moral epistemology is he employing, and is it coherent, and has he even fleshed it out in a clear way? I suspect the answer is no. But he has a lot of videos. I haven't seen them all. Maybe he does in one of the other videos. If I'm being honest, I very much doubt that he says anything that I would find compelling on the matter. But what can I say? Unless I have a conversation with him, I'm not going to be able to get that great of an appraisal. Well, I might be understating it a bit. I think his meta-ethical views are pretty poorly developed, but I would say that about anybody that has a realist position. It's just going to be a matter of degree, right? And Sapir says, to be fair, T-Jump is not super patient and fair to nice to many people. Not that it means what you said is invalid. I agree. I think that T-Jump has a serious problem with being incredibly rude, dismissive. He interrupts people. He insults people. He's belligerent with people and has I think, a very bad attitude. And that's one of the main reasons I haven't reached out to him to talk to him. He'll tell people to shut up. He's rude to people. I don't want to talk to people like that. And I haven't publicly said as much, but yeah, I don't really want to talk to him unless he improves his attitude. I'm not going to tell someone that that's not how they should talk to other people. Like, I'm not going to be like, stop talking to me like that. I'll just not talk to somebody like that. If people want to be belligerent in some corners of the internet, I guess they could do that. I don't think it's productive. I don't think it's good. I wish they didn't do that, but I don't need to bring that into my life. I get enough stress. I don't need to deal with people yelling at me and telling me to shut up. So, if his attitude improves and he's nicer to people, I'd be happy to talk to him. But Until then, if I were invited to have a discussion, I would say no. I'm not interested in talking to him. And it's not because of his philosophical views. It's because I've seen too many videos where he goes off on people, and I'm not a fan of that. All right. Well, it's kind of late, so let me see if they say anything else that I think I could comment on in the next 5 minutes. Otherwise, oh, Esther responded. That's very fair. Thanks for. Yeah, yeah. So that's all I have to say about that for now. Let's see if they have anything else to say in this podcast for now. We got another hour and 8 minutes left of it, I think.
Something like how the moral realist would situate, the moral realist position is situated relative to this along the second prong of what is kind of the ontological status of these moral properties.
So I think in order to understand what's going on here, we're going to have to back up and contextualize both the industrial revolution that Nietzsche is witnessing, the birth of modern science, which has also come to fruition in the 20th century. So the same conditions, social and material conditions that are motivating Nietzsche's turn in his critique of morality are also motivating early 20th century analytic metaethicists. At the time, the dominant idea about not only the meaning and function of our moral statements, but the deep structure of morality is that it has to have some natural basis. Naturalism is the default position, that our morality has to be grounded in something very familiar to us, natural facts, perhaps social facts.
And I think this is an essential point for us to pause to just emphasize how crucial this is, that this entire discourse that's going to arise in 20th century analytic moral philosophy around intuitionism and the possibility of non-natural moral properties seems to depend upon a certain horizon of interpretation and philosophy that has been already established, where natural science sets the standard of several things. It sets the standard of what we consider an object to be, in the sense of physical, natural objects as described by science, but also what would constitute a rigorous methodology for philosophy, in the sense that science has perhaps provided the gold standard of what we consider to be a rigorous method. Philosophy should try to emulate this. And I think it's really important to emphasize that this background, in an effort to make philosophy analogous to science in this way, really seems to structure the entire concept of objective moral properties as it's going to come up in this tradition.
Absolutely. And the particular version of moral realism, which we will be examining shortly, the Rossian intuitionist tradition, really begins with the publication of a book called Principia Ethica, or the Principles of Ethics, by G.E. Moore.
Okay, that's a good place to stop. So, yeah, this is where the rot in analytic metaethics began, is with G.E. Moore. So we'll save that for the next video. I think it's a good place to get to. So yeah, we got some preliminary comments on this, but they're going to get into the meat of it later, I suppose. I don't remember how much of this I listened to. I think I listened to quite a bit further, but it was months and months, almost a year ago. So maybe more than a year ago. Maybe I listened to it when it came out. Anyway, that's it for now as far as that. So happy to take any more questions if people have questions in the chat, and we'll get to finishing up this podcast another time. All right. Oh, I didn't check the poll on what color to change to. Let's see. Looks like blue is the winner by a lot. So it's not a big change from purple. So unusual choice, but let's do it. Boom. Blue. Did it change? I think it did, right? Yeah, that changed. Okay. Oh, I see. There we go. Cool. We got blue. I hope you're all happy with that. Let's turn up the brightness too. Bam. Okay. So y'all get what you want. We'll shift it to blue. Maybe I should change the color and keep it on different colors until certain thresholds are crossed. I like that idea, but it's going to be purple, right? I mean, that's my color. Yeah. I mean, whenever I could use purple for something, I use it. I don't know. I've always had an attachment to purple. All right, everybody. I think that's it. I didn't see any more questions come in the chat, but we did hit 2,000 subscribers during this stream. So it's a historic stream. My rise to meta ethics greatness. So I'm glad you're all here with me. Thanks again, Nitty, for the $10 that you threw my way. Thanks everybody else for being here. I'm glad you could all be here to continue the crusade to crush moral realism. Oh, and before I head out, let me throw this at y'all. I hadn't posted any other blog post this week. So maybe I should just do another stream where I talk about this one. So this is my latest blog post where I talk about some stuff going on over on Twitter on metaethics. I'm on Blue Sky, I'm on Twitter. So if you go to the description for this video, you'll see Linktree. And if you follow my Linktree, you'll get like access to Patreon and my blog and like my academic site and all that stuff. You can find all my stuff. So if you haven't done that before, check that out too. You can see where else I'm at besides YouTube. I use the posting section here. I think they used to call it community. Now it says posts. Post surveys and polls and stuff over there. I got a Discord server. You can join my Discord. You get all kinds of options. And StreamYard, it's your fault that this freezes constantly. It's your fault. I've been on other people's shows on YouTube where they use something other than StreamYard and it doesn't freeze. I use Zoom, doesn't freeze. I use Microsoft Teams, it doesn't freeze. Nothing freezes except StreamYard. So it's a StreamYard problem. So really bums me out. All right. So Pierce says, Lance, I'm curious about empirical data and how people might explain something about what their stance reduces to. Maybe not the best way to phrase the question. Hopefully you can interpret that in a better way than I asked. Sorry, I don't know what you're asking. I don't know what you're asking. Can you try rephrasing? And this will be the last question I field. So no more questions. Not that anybody was asking. Oh, wow. People are already tuning out. That's cool. Sapir, are you going to throw a question at me or no? You know what? Save it for the next stream. And by the way, do you ever go on Voice? Like I could bring you up as like a guest. Is that something you would do? Not now, but another time. Oh, right. Did I actually post? Yeah, I did post the blog post. Forgetting what I'm doing in the middle of doing it. All right, I replaced the pinned message. You can check that out. All right, Sapir, I'm not seeing a follow-up from you, so maybe throw it in the comments for the video or something. Give it some more thought. And also you'll have more space to type there. And then I'd be happy to check out that question. But for now, I'm going to head out of here. Thanks again, everybody. See you all later. Okay. Now the comment comes in, of course, right when I say I'm done. Okay, so lots of people might say they care about particular things because of harm or something. I'm curious about other explanations. Try to develop a comment in the comment section if you want to, or we'll talk another time so that there's more space for you to develop that and I can more adequately address it. And I'll be less tired, which is bonus. All right. I'm going to call it quits there, though. Thanks, everybody. And thanks, Sapir. Sorry for not, the question looks like it still needs to be fermented a bit before it's ready for me to deal with. And I think my yeah, Sapir says sorry I had a bad delay. And I'm burnt out. I'm done. Let's head out of here. See y'all later, everybody. Do all the stuff, like the video, subscribe, leave a comment, share it around, all the stuff. See y'all later.